Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to host Anne-Marie Leimer. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name. I want to also acknowledge the presence of Carmen Febles, who is one of the writers for the book of Consuelo Jimenez Underwood, Art, Living, and Vision. I'd like to introduce Anne-Marie Leimer, who received her PhD in art history from the University of Texas in Austin, at Austin with a specialization of contemporary Chicanx Latinx art. She currently serves as professor of art for the Juanita and Ralph Harvey School of Visual Arts at Midwestern State University in Wichita Falls, Texas. Her published work has appeared in several journals. Among them is After Image, Chicana Latina Studies, the Journal of Latin American Studies and Religion and the Arts, and in the books Beyond Heritage, Border Crossings, Chicana Critical Perspectives and Praxis, New Frontiers in Latin American Borderlands, Latinx Artists of Texas, Voices in Concert in the Spirit of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, and Los Maestros, Early Explorers of Chicano Identity. She has curated several exhibitions of Chicanx art, including Adelante, Siempre, recent work by Southern California Chicana photographers, Chicano photography of the 1970s from a Chicano perspective, and Glow, I guess it's Arizona, right? AX, a community at the crossroads. Leimer serves on the National Advisory Board for Mexican American Arts since 1848, a research initiative inaugurated by Karen Marie Davalos and Constance Cortez in 2016, which hosts a searchable digital platform and will produce a multi-volume book, Adjacent Imaginaries. And more importantly, she's a co-editor with Dr. Laura E. Perez of the anthology Consuelo Jimenez Underwood, Art, Women, Vision, published recently by Duke University Press. We're so excited to have you, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much for coming, driving from Fort Worth and being here with us today.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, Patricia. I wanted to just do a tiny bit of housekeeping at the beginning because many of us forget to silence our cell phones and our smartwatches. So if you haven't already done that, please take a moment. And I also wanted to thank Patricia for this amazing opportunity to present to you the work that has been a labor of love with Dr. Perez and myself for the last 5 years. And Laura will not be able to be with us today. She had previous research commitments that aren't, so we're channeling her spirit. So she's with us in spirit, if not in body today. And two other things that I wanted to acknowledge as we begin to unpack the book a little bit for all of you, and that is that we received the Wyeth Foundation for American Art Publication Fund of the College Art Association, and my home institution, Midwestern State University, known as MSU Texas, and a project grant from UC Berkeley. All of these three funding sources allowed us and supported the full-color illustrations that you see in this particular anthology. So we want to acknowledge our funding sources, and it really made a magnificent difference, I think, to the quality of the book to have so much of Consuelo's work available to the public in full-color illustration.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So what I would like to do today is to read certain sections of the anthology and to orient you to it initially. So the first thing that I'm going to do is read from the introduction. And the introduction, it consists of 3 parts. It was a part that was written solely by Dr. Perez, a section that was written solely by myself, and then we collaborated and wrote together the third section. So I'm going to start there because it talks a little bit about how we conceived the structure of the text. This anthology is organized in 3 sections. As in weaving, we first had to select the thread in a creative but preparatory production stage. In our anthology, a small group of essays serves an analogous function in part 1, spinning, making thread. A preface by renowned Chicano writer and filmmaker Luis Valdez opens the section. It is followed by essays by Carol Sauvignon and Christine Laffer. In part 2, weaving, handwork, essays developed for exhibition catalogs and for art historical and interdisciplinary visual cultural studies scholarship. Look closely at Jimenez Underwood's work. The bulk of the anthology's essays are here, written by Constance Cortez, Amalia Mesa Baines, Laura E. Perez, Maria Esther Fernandez, Emily Zayden, Clara Roman Orio, Anne-Marie Leimer, Karen Mary Davalos, Christine Serna, Carmen Feblis, who's with us today, and Janelle Navarro. Part 3, Off the Loom into the World, examines Jimenez Underwood's effects as a teacher in her own and others' classrooms and through her public lectures. It includes essays by Robert Milnes and Marcos Pizarro, and a poem by prize-winning poet Veronica Reyes that closes the anthology. So that's the basic structure in this three-part approach that we took, using weaving and thread as a way to structure and analyze the anthology. Now what I would like to do is read another section of the co-authored part of the introduction that talks a little bit about the placement of Consuelo's work. The authors in this anthology demonstrate the multiple contributions that the work of Consuelo Jimenez Underwood makes to various fields of study, such as art history, cultural studies, ethnic studies, gender studies, history, religious studies, visual cultural studies, and women of color feminisms. Deploying analyses rooted in feminist intersectional and simultaneity of oppressions approaches, examining the complex implications of racialization, gender, class, and histories of imperialism, the anthology's contributors are attentive to the specificities of the artist's historical and cultural moment, the conditions of Jimenez Underwood's childhood, and her career through the present. They are mindful of what it meant for the artist to be raised on the border as a child of a Mexican-American mother and an undocumented immigrant Mexican-Haitian father, of her family's labor and her own childhood labor in the fields of California, and of her tremendous compassion for those who are cruelly targeted today by anti-immigrant sentiment and her concern for the environmental fate of our planet. From this engagement with her time and our time and place, Consuelo Jimenez Underwood makes a particularly unique and socially urgent contribution to the histories of art and visual culture. Many artists have produced bodies of work that elicit a sense of awe. Because of their technical mastery, they intrigue us with their conceptual depth and breadth. They move us deeply with the sheer power of their aesthetic beauty and prompt us to action by giving us a deeper understanding of the toxic effects of dominant power structures through the construction of compelling and incisive social critiques. Rarely, however, do we encounter work that accomplishes all these tasks while also exploiting the established boundaries of art media and blurring disciplinary boundaries of visual art forms such as installation, performance, sculpture, theater, murals, public art, and community-engaged, socially conscious art. And Consuelo's work does all of this. In many ways, Consuelo Jimenez Underwood defies strict art historical classification, precisely because she repeatedly uses a complex confluence of media and multiple art forms in her work. Now I would like to take you to the section, and I'll read just brief parts of the section of the introduction that Dr. Perez wrote. So this is her writing for us. I first became aware of Consuelo Jimenez Underwood through her altar installation, Alba, from 1997, a strikingly poetic artwork that featured a wire mesh cone that climbed 32 feet toward the ceiling of San Francisco's Mexican Museum. Its base was at the center of a 6-foot crescent moon, traced on the gallery floor with small white stones. Ears of corn and other objects lay in a small heap at the center. The piece seemed to render visible the correspondences activated in spiritual offerings. casting those connections in the language of the net, a weaving of threads and air, of the material and the immaterial, in short, of heaven and earth. The title, Alba, or Dawn, captured the liminal through the crepuscular, when night and day are simultaneously present. Grounding the moon as the base of the piece lent it to further musings about the relationship of the moon to planetary life, to the earth, to the human, and pointed to what is above and beyond the moon in the cosmos. The verticality of the wire netting proffered a rendition of the proverbial spiritual ladder. This encounter still fills me with wonder, and I remember even now the feeling that it invoked in me. I could see the artist's hand in the making and feel her own reverence before what she invoked and to which she paid homage. This was more than 20 years ago, in 1997. Sometime later, I began corresponding with the artist. I visited her Cupertino, California home and her studio in Molalla to interview her and enjoyed hours studying slides of her work, newspaper reviews, and a few curatorial exhibition catalogs. I wrote about some of her work of that period, including Sacred Jump and the Land Grab series, in a book on Chicana feminist art and spirituality. In the decade that followed, I came to know Consuelo, her family, and her work better as she began preparing for her 2009 retirement. And her work better as, her retirement from teaching, and as she started to develop more or less simultaneously several new series that she anticipated would occupy the coming decade, 2009 to 2019, as indeed it did. We continued to work closely. Consuelo's often poetic experimental work, the product of an artist who masters weaving, is also the medium of some of the most serious work of our decade, from which she lays bare the less pleasant landscape of our time and place. California's entrenched anti-Mexicanism, crafted across more than 150 years following the U.S.-Mexican War of 1846 to 1848, and beneath this the anti-Indigenous and anti-African American racism that rationalized Eurocentric colonial settler occupation of the indigenous Americas, warfare against Mexico and Spain, and the annexation of their territories, and slavery, are not off the hook in Consuelo's work, nor, most importantly, is their legacy today, found in the inhumane and dehumanizing racial profiling of, criminalization of, violence against, and ongoing social, economic, political, and cultural marginalization of people of color and our cultures. Indeed, early on, metallic wire and barbed wire, signatures of her work, grin, sever, cross, tear, and hide within the folds of beautiful woven pieces. Against this era of historically disproportionate enrichment and pauperization, against the hardening of the heart that does not see homelessness, poverty, immigration due to war, and economic crises as our problems, against the ethical and moral confusion of patriarchal bias, of Eurocentric racism, of classism, and of a human centrism that has already destroyed a great deal of our planetary commons, Consuelo Jimenez Underwood grows her strangely beautiful hybrids. Crossing painting, silkscreen, installation, and murals with spinning, weaving, sewing, and embroidery, she creates things that seem impossible, like a tree that envelops the barbed wire that once fenced it, and flowers that push their way up through the pavement. In 2013, Maria Esther Fernandez curated a one-woman exhibition of Consuelo's work at the Trite Museum in Santa Clara, California. It was something of a retrospective that brought together older work with pieces from her newer series. After years of talking about how good it would be to write extensively about Consuelo's work and publish images of it in book form, it finally happened after that exhibition. In late 2014, I sent invitations to various people, some of whom Consuelo had named. She had worked with them over the years and felt that they understood her work. Some of whom were scholars I had heard or read who had written about her work, or other artists. We eventually included a poet whose wonderful poem joins the assembly gathered here. Others wanted to co-edit or write, but their prior commitments did not permit this. Leimer, who had been missing all along, joined me as co-editor midway through our project. In the end, Consuelo's allegiance is not to a nation, or even to a people, but to our environmentally imperiled planet. The indigenous philosophies or worldviews that she draws upon, those of her own family, of ritual, of her husband's ancestral Yaqui, that through marriage is also her own, of the Mesoamerican core of common indigenous beliefs, reflected in Maya and Nahua's spiritual and philosophical beliefs, become, as religions and philosophies hope to be, useful perspectives from which to heal the human-made social infirmities that allow sexism, racism, classism, and the like. These indigenous philosophies decenter an irresponsible, narrow human awareness into a more responsible, modest, accurate understanding of ourselves as a mere, if crucial, part of an interdependent planet. Her work as a whole suggests we matter, not more nor less than other life forms. Our authors here help us to follow her in this pilgrimage toward the wisdom that characterizes her art, her love of thread and weaving, her vision. Now I'd like to read a short section of the introduction that I wrote. I first learned about the art of Consuelo Jimenez Underwood in May 2010, when I received an announcement for the group exhibition Chicana, Spiritual Reflections, which was advertised as the initial show in an exhibition series titled Bay Area Chicana, sponsored by the Castellano Family Foundation. I had lived in the Bay Area for 15 years before attending graduate school in Texas, and I welcomed any opportunity to return home, especially because my interest in Chicanx art had been fostered at San Francisco's Galeria de la Raza and the Mission Cultural Center for Latino Arts, as well as San Jose's Movimiento de Arte y Cultura Latino-Americana, also known as MACLA, and through frequent exposure to the plethora of murals throughout San Francisco's Mission District. Because my research interests often focused on the intersections of Chicana art and spirituality, I resolved to see the show as soon as the semester concluded. One day in early June, I boarded a plane to San Jose, took a cab from the airport to the Triton Museum in Santa Clara, interviewed the show's curator, Maria Esther Fernandez, extensively photo-documented the artworks for the rest of the day, and flew back to Southern California that evening. The extraordinary work I encountered that day, especially undocumented border flowers from 2010, has inspired many research presentations. When I entered the central exhibition room at the Triton, I encountered undocumented border flowers, which consumed an entire wall of the museum and composed the second work in Jimenez Underwood's ongoing Borderlines series. I was immediately struck by the combination of installation, mural, sculpture, and painted and sewn textiles, and felt a sense of commemoration and incantatory petition similar to a home altar. Having studied and exhibited sculpture in the Bay Area before graduate school, I was completely taken with the three-dimensional qualities of her installation. The found and fabricated objects that composed the power wands or place markers that indicated twin border cities, such as Calexico, California, and Mexicali, Baja California, The 10 gorgeous, larger-than-life-sized flowers representing the specific border states, and the tiny, three-dimensional votive image of the Virgin of Guadalupe that Jimenez Underwood inserted amid red barbed wire, pierced by gold and silver nails that mark the El Paso Ciudad Juarez border. I had once laboriously woven various colors of ribbon into the diagonal openings of a punishing and inflexible wire mesh to fashion a garment honoring a particular individual. But this was weaving, sewing, and paying tribute to all sentient beings on a grand and unimaginable scale. I became a co-editor of this anthology in March 2017 at the invitation of Laura E. Perez. The following spring, I traveled to the Bay Area where I first met Consuelo Jimenez Underwood and experienced the artist at work on her loom, weaving what would later become For You and Me, one of a trio of works celebrating the folk musician Woody Guthrie. During that visit, she showed me a range of works, from the earliest surviving examples of her embroidery on family clothing, to her first intentionally wearable rebozo, which measures more than 8 feet long and graces the wall above her living room window, to her first delicate tapestries with their infinitesimal warp and weft threads, and which contain select sections in which the artist used silver metallic thread to produce distinct patterns, a harbinger of greater things to come. The way Jimenez Underwood uses fiber is revelatory. Thread becomes not just a tool for suturing together disparate parts, but one for drawing in space and in time. It becomes line, becomes texture, becomes energy pulsating with life. In her hands, thread has a life of its own. It critiques and cajoles. It provokes and prognosticates. It rages and repairs. In the artist's statement that accompanied the Chicana Spiritual Reflections exhibition, Jimenez Underwood expressed a hope that her work would induce her audience to recognize the threads that bind us. My co-editor, our authors, and I have woven together an anthology that demonstrates the profound contribution that the work of Consuelo Jimenez Underwood makes to the histories of art and to our world. Let us, like the artist, initiate the process of healing and transformation our planet so dearly needs, and begin with the threads that connect us steadfastly and irrefutably to each other. So Patricia, we're about at 30 minutes. I can certainly read a little bit more, but do you think this would be a moment to end?
I think it was a very good moment to see if we have any questions from the public, from the audience.
Did you go over this large work that's in the background of the book?
Absolutely. One of the things that we write about in the anthology is not only the depth and breadth, but also the scope of her work. So if you go down this area, you'll see these absolutely teeny tiny tapestries. And that was one of the things that she began to do as a part of her graduate studies work. And then, of course, you can see how those initial engagement with thread and fiber and weaving has jumped off the loom, right? Those are some things that we organized the anthology to address. But this particular one brings together about 3 or 4 major material or media themes that we see repeatedly in Consuelo Jimenez Underwood's work. And that would be the repetition of the caution sign. And so in a number of publications on Consuelo, I trace the development of the caution sign, which happened in the 1980s. And interestingly enough, it was a Navajo man, a graphic artist, who was hired by the Department of Transportation in California to design this particular sign. And when you watch Consuelo's interviews or her videos that have been made of her, she talks talks about how painful and how angry she is when she has encountered this sign, because I think the quote is, they're thinking of us as animals, right? So that the fleeing family, the father, the mother, and the child are crossing the border and then going in and out of traffic. And so many people were being killed at that time in the 80s in California and other places. And so the intention of the Department of Transportation was to prevent those deaths. So it's something that you see in large scale here, but also it's repeated as a stamp or a silkscreen in many of her other works. And also the humble safety pin is something that Consuelo absolutely triumphs because she says, well, you know, in modern day times, we don't have time to fix the hem of our skirt, right? We just use a safety pin. And I think there's so many ways that we could address the idea of the pin, because it is something that is humble and quotidian, and yet she elevates it to something that is incredibly aesthetic. So this idea of connection is part of the idea of the pin, but I also think the idea of perforation and piercing is a part of sort of the nuance or the symbolic understanding of the pin. Because she's trying to repair damage of the earth and of people and of migrant and immigrant communities by putting all of these small pieces of fabric together. And there are particularly two parts that I love of this. I saw this for the first time in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at one of her exhibitions where she did border lines installation, and she was working with the community there to trace the migratory patterns of people and also the area of how the border affected the people in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So this area is the one that I particularly like, because you can see she's taken this one and then a little bit up and to the left. These are pieces of jeans, right, that we wear all the time. And this idea of taking something that is ordinary and holding it up as something that has spiritual and aesthetic power is very much a part of Consuelo's work. And the title of this one is See Jane Run. And so there's a couple of other ways that her titles refer to Dick and Jane and reading in early childhood. So this is one of the pieces that relates to that nuance that we have. How did we first read the stories of Dick and Jane? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
Yes.
It's one of those things where this is so monumental, or nearly monumental, in comparison with the very delicate tapestries that we see. Well, you know what I could do? This is part of my chapter.
I'm going to ask you about this one. You can talk about it.
Maybe there's a section. I wasn't sure if this one had made it on time.
Yes.
Because I know that the official opening, and I hope you'll come back next week for the official opening of the exhibition. But this is part of a three-part series, and so my co-editor, Laura, was very attenuated and attuned to what do we need to place in the book, right? So we work on the flag series. Carmen Febres and Janelle Navarro write on the Reyboso series. Other people treat the flags, and this work, the work that you see directly over here, was done so recently, it's not in the exhibition, or it's not in this particular book, so we're hoping that future scholars will be publishing more work on that. So I thought maybe what I could do is just kind of give you a very brief introduction to the triptych and my chapter, and then a little bit on this particular work. So my chapter is chapter 9 in the anthology, and it's titled Garments for the Goddess of the Americas, the American Dress Triptych. And I'll try to keep this short and to the point. It's hard to take something that you've worked on, and there are so many threads in this particular chapter, right? I'm talking about how the dress form has been used in Chicana and Chicano art. I'm talking about the use of Mesoamerican imagery in Chicana art, and a number of other spiritual practices that find their way and shape the content of Chicana art as well. As early as 2007, art historical criticism generated by leading Chicanx scholar Constance Cortez places the work of fiber artist Consuelo Jimenez Underwood firmly under the theoretical umbrella of the post-colonial. In her essay, Cortez refers to Jimenez Underwood's work as topographies, a term used to describe the three-dimensionality of the artist's wall hangings and installations. Topographical maps refer to two-dimensional drawings that use lines or blocks of color to indicate the shape of distinct physical features, the elevation or depression of natural phenomena, such as lakes, mountains, and canyons, the presence of rainfall or its lack. Summarizing the overall nature of the artist's work, Cortez explains that the textile becomes a map through which we travel, and that the artist provides viewers with a personal cartographic journey through which they can view with clarity the impact of real and imagined lines of demarcation. This visualized journey is nowhere more evident than in the artworks examined in this study: American Dress, Virgen de Chocolate, and American Dress, Virgen de Tepín, Chile, both from 1999, and Undocumented Nopal 2525 AD, which you see over here on the wall, which contain Jimenez Underwood's signature elements, visual depictions of specific geographic areas, map-making conventions such as parallels and meridians, delicately fashioned grid lines and silk-screened images of deities such as the Virgin of Guadalupe and the Mexica earth goddess, Coatlicue, and yet compose a unique place in the artist's production, both in form and in function. Using the lens of the spiritual, this study locates Tepín, Chocolat, and Nopal within multiple worldviews and spiritual traditions where clothing acts as a ritual or healing object, provides a close examination of the Mesoamerican figure of Coatlicue and her role within the American Dress series, and investigates the multivalent symbolic meanings of Chile, cacao, and Nopal. So I'm going to summarize a little bit of this and then maybe get to the description here of the work, the third work. So she began this work in the late 1990s. She had gone to Spain for an exhibition and a gallery work. And the folks there were trying to place her, like, who are you? What are your roots? And she said, I'll use her quote, she said, when she replied, Californian, Mexican American, they responded with laughter and said, Americana, Americana, emphasizing her nationality over ethnicity or regional affiliation. And she thought to herself, darn right, for I come from the land of Chile, chocolate, and nopales. When Jimenez Underwood returned to the United States, the concept for the triptych took shape. And so she begins to think about what are the fragments that we have of textiles from pre-contact times. And most of them, because of the kinds of landscapes and climate conditions, we have just very small pieces of these textiles. And so she said that what she wanted to do was just suggest a part of a dress, and that dress also was part of a map. So it was a fragment of the dress. Although all three works resemble dresses, they are in fact wall hangings that have more in common with the quilted and embroidered fabric of border flowers flag and the grid demarcation of sacred jump. Initially, the viewer reads these works more as garments than as flat wall hangings because of their empire or high-waisted silhouettes, and that's true for the first two. Virgen de Tepín and Virgen de Chocolat, because it's ruffled and ruched at the top, and she's inserting red barbed wire in the silk red velvet fabric that she's using to create these wall hangings. And of course, work that you see here was done 20 years later as the third part in the triptych. In another gesture toward identity construction, Tepín, Chocolat, and Nopal acknowledge and celebrate three of the artist's favorite foods: Chile, chocolate, and cactus, all indigenous to the Americas, like the artist. And then I'll just talk a little bit about the importance of these foodstuffs, because they are food, but they are more than food, especially in the work of Consuelo. The word Tepín in the title refers to Chiltepín or Chiltepec in Nahuatl, the indigenous language of central Mexico. And Tepín is a small, round, red, intensely hot fruit that gives Jimenez Underwood great delight. Her passion for the heat and spice of Chile endures, and the respect she has for this indigenous plant shaped her wish to celebrate the eating of Chile in the Americas. Similarly, in Nopal, the work that you see here, the artist celebrates a lifelong relationship with the nopal, the prickly pear cactus, or opuntia. Her intention in making this work was to give thanks to the plant for its life-sustaining, nutritive, and healing powers, as well as its function as a mordant or fixative for natural dyeing. Whereas the artist views Chile as the fire that cooks the food and chocolate as a treat, she understands nopal fundamentally as an always available food source, stating that it often was the only thing we had in the house, and that I would not be here if not for this food. Her intention then in Nopal is to reflect a relationship between the plant and me, to give honor to the food and to her ancestors for developing this incredible plant which grows anywhere and which can provide so much. The plant then symbolizes physical survival and daily sustenance that create the very fiber of human life and allow for its continuity. Then just in terms of characterizing the entire triptych, I'll read just a couple of things, and then I'll read a little bit of the description of how she began to work on this particular work. Tepín, Chocolat, and Nopal constitute a sharp deviation from much of Jimenez Underwood's art production because they are not woven, but rather hand-sewn. This is what is so extraordinary about these works that you see. They're completely hand-sewn. Every stitch was not done by machine. And then she embellished them with buttons, barbed and copper wire, silk-screened images, and gold metallic thread. And then what I'm not really telling you yet is that you can see some of the demarcations in the work around here with the meridians, the vertical and horizontal, the latitude and the longitude lines. And those are still present here in Nopal, but they're very present in the earlier two works of the triptych.
A small interruption. We're very excited that we're going to be showcasing the Tepín in New York City. So you all have to come
to New York City,
to the gallery in New York to see the dress of Chile.
Let's see. Okay, so probably just one other point that I wanted to make, because I want you to understand a little bit more. Not all of you may be familiar with Mesoamerican deities, Mesoamerican worldviews. So the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe and the image of Coatlicue, who's a Mexica. Aztec is the more commonly misnomer used that's to discuss the indigenous peoples pre-contact of central Mexico. But I wanted to characterize a little bit about for you who this deity is and why she is so important in Consuelo's work. Because this idea of mother and mothering, not only the earth, but of people, is a thread throughout the chapter, but also throughout Consuelo's work. As Earth Mother, Coatlicue represents the duality of life and death in complementary opposition. And considering that she is the mother of more than 400 children, it is no wonder that she is also understood as a symbol of fertility and one who bestows fertility. In her role as mother, she can be seen as our mother, the mother of the people. Another key aspect of Coatlicue that helps us think about Jimenez Underwood's use of this image in American dress is that Coatlicue as Earth Goddess is the mother of Huitzilopochtli, the Mexica's patron deity. Huitzilopochtli, in his role as patron deity, also instigates the great migration of the Mexica, which takes about 200 years, from their Paradise Island home of Aztlan to the new capital, Tenochtitlan, which is now contemporary Mexico City. which I find an apt symbolic reference to themes of migration and border crossing in the work of Jimenez Underwood. What could be a more appropriate parallel to the experiences of contemporary border crossers than the journey fraught with danger, deprivation, humiliation, family separation, and enslavement suffered by the Mexica? So they leave Aztlan, and for 200 years their patron deity, Huitzilopochtli, urges them on to found a new capital. And so if you're familiar with the iconography of the Mexican flag, you know that there is a cactus on a rock, and there is an eagle, often with a snake in its mouth. And Huitzilopochtli said to the Mexica, there are 8 groups that leave Aztlan, and 7, which after 200 years of pilgrimage, finally found Tenochtitlan. The deity Huitzilopochtli says to them, where you found your new capital will be this place where you see an eagle on top of a cactus on top of a rock. And so, not surprisingly, the word Mexica, Mexico, etc., and that iconography is in the Mexican flag. And let's see. I think the last part that I wanted to read, so hopefully that characterizes the triptych a little bit for you. And it was something that I mentioned, I didn't quite finish my thought earlier, but Laura commissioned me to write this. I was focusing on some other things in the initial work that I wanted to include in the anthology, and she said, Anne, there's a section that's missing. And we were trying to represent as much as possible the breadth of Consuelo's work, and so she asked me to do this work, which I was very excited to do. The works examined in this essay celebrate indigenous foodstuffs, plants native to the Americas, and when the artist elevates Chile, chocolate, and nopal to the level of the sacred, these plants, in all their mundane and symbolic power, become aspects of the goddess of the Americas. Their continued existence testifies to a world before European contact and exploitation, recalls the extraordinary contributions and traditional knowledge systems of pre-contact American civilizations, reveals their multivalent functions as symbolic, quotidian, and gustatory, and reminds us that life is pain and pleasure, spicy and sweet. Jimenez Underwood uses a titular and formal allusion to the dress that equates the sacred female body with the earth, and with earth as mother, indigenous virgin, goddess, and divine power. Therefore, the works constitute an offering to the sacred feminine, to the goddess of the Americas, and to the indigenous bodies that have endured. Significantly, Jimenez Underwood embeds in the artworks a pressing petition for the health and preservation of the planet, and an ominous warning to those who have learned the urgency of this plea. I see the careful, intentional process of making these works by hand as an act of love, an act of spiritual devotion to Mother Earth, and as a call of action to honor and protect her. Understood within these contexts, the American dress triptych can certainly be seen as Jimenez Underwood intended, as a statement of deep, profound, and prideful American indigenous identity, and as garments that join the lineage of sacred clothing infused with power by the intentional, painstaking labor of the maker. And that's the concluding paragraph of my chapter.
That's so great. Thank you, Anne-Marie.